When Trust Shattered, A Journey of Love, Betrayal, and Rebirth. I was once a man named Daniel Mercer, a man who believed that love was an unbreakable bond. I had spent nearly a decade building a life with my wife, Isabella. We met in college, both eager and full of hope, and quickly found that we were each other's perfect match. Isabella had a radiant smile, and her laughter filled our tiny apartment in the heart of the city with a warmth that made every day seem golden. I worked as a graphic designer, spending long hours behind my computer, while she, an aspiring writer, nurtured her dreams of publishing a novel. Our shared passions brought us together, and for a time, it seemed as though nothing could tarnish the bliss we had built. Our mornings were filled with quiet rituals. We'd sip coffee together on our sunlit balcony, discussing our plans for the day. We talked about the future, trips we wanted to take, books we would write, and the family we would one day have. In those days, our lives were woven together with threads of trust, laughter, and unwavering commitment. I remember how Isabella's eyes would light up whenever she recounted a new idea for a story, and I would listen intently, imagining a life full of creative adventures by her side. There were moments when life was simple and predictable, and the steady rhythm of our everyday existence lent me a sense of security. We took walks in the park on warm evenings, sat in silence as the city hummed around us, and relished the small victories that marked the passage of time. It was in these moments that I believed in the eternal nature of love, so pure and resilient that nothing could ever shake its foundation. As time passed, subtle shifts began to appear in our relationship. I started noticing little things, an unexplained phone call here, a whispered conversation there. It was as if a slow undercurrent of distance had seeped into the fabric of our daily lives. At first, I chalked it up to the pressures of our respective careers. Isabella's writing had begun to take up more of her time, and I, too, was often lost in the demanding world of graphic design. Still, a quiet part of me wondered if these changes were more than just the natural evolution of a long-term relationship. One chilly November evening, after a long day at work, I returned home earlier than usual. I found Isabella sitting by the window, staring blankly at the darkening sky. Her phone lay beside her, the screen glowing faintly with unread messages. Something in her expression was different, there was a guardedness that hadn't been there before. I tried to strike up a conversation, but she remained distant, her replies clipped and vague. I told myself that perhaps she was simply lost in thought, yet deep down I knew that something was amiss. I began to notice more pronounced signs over the following weeks. There were instances when Isabella would receive mysterious texts late at night and then quickly hide her phone when I entered the room. I overheard hushed conversations on the phone when I passed by her study. The ease with which she could retreat into a private world was disconcerting. Every unexplained absence, every furtive glance at her screen, added another small crack to the image of a perfect life we had built together. One fateful Saturday afternoon, when the air was crisp and the leaves painted the sidewalks with hues of amber and gold, I found myself alone at home. Isabella had told me she was meeting a friend for lunch, a story that, on that day, I did not question. With nothing pressing to occupy my time, I sat down at my desk and decided to catch up on some overdue reading. My eyes wandered to the corner of our shared desk where Isabella's journal lay. Overcome by a mix of curiosity and a gnawing sense of foreboding, I flipped it open. What I found in those pages turned my world upside down. Between carefully written paragraphs of mundane thoughts and dreams, I uncovered entries that spoke of secret meetings, stolen moments, and the warmth of another's touch. The words were intimate and raw, revelations of a connection that was both passionate and deeply personal. There, in ink and paper, was a detailed account of Isabella's growing attachment to a man named Lucas, a name that sent shockwaves through my heart. Every word stung like a betrayal. I read about secret rendezvous in quiet cafes, long phone calls filled with tender confessions, and promises made in hushed tones. The diary entries painted a picture of a relationship that had been flourishing in the shadows for months. I couldn't believe that the woman I loved, the woman with whom I had shared my dreams and vulnerabilities, could harbor such deep secrets. It was as if a part of our shared history had been rewritten without my knowledge. I spent hours poring over every detail, each entry confirming my worst fears. The realization that Isabella had allowed herself to be swept up in an affair was like a tidal wave crashing over me, leaving me drowning in a sea of betrayal and sorrow. I felt numb, as if time itself had slowed down, giving me a moment to confront the enormity of the deception. Questions swirled in my mind: when did it start, how long had it been going on, and what had I missed while I trusted blindly? The weight of the discovery pressed down on me relentlessly, and I knew I had to confront Isabella. I spent a sleepless night rehearsing every word, every emotion, trying to summon the courage to face the woman I thought I knew. When evening finally arrived, I sat in our living room, heart pounding, waiting for her return. The room was filled with an eerie silence, the kind that precedes a storm. When the door opened, Isabella walked in with a serene expression that belied the tumult that was about to unfold. I couldn't hold back any longer. "Isabella," I began, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt, "we need to talk." Her eyes widened for a moment, and I saw a flash of something, guilt, perhaps, or fear, before it vanished behind a mask of calm. We moved to the kitchen table, and I laid out the evidence in front of me. I showed her the journal entries, the detailed descriptions of her meetings with Lucas. With every word I spoke, I felt the weight of our shared past crumble. Isabella's face drained of color as she listened to my accusations, her eyes welling up with tears. For what felt like an eternity, we sat in silence, the air heavy with the pain of betrayal. Finally, through trembling sobs, she admitted the truth. "David, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never meant to hurt you. It just happened. It was like I was caught up in something I couldn't control." Her words, meant to appease the storm raging inside me, only deepened the wound. I demanded to know how long it had been going on, how deeply she had fallen into this secret life. Isabella's confession was fragmented, marked by regret and sorrow, yet the betrayal was complete. Lucas was not a passing fancy, he had been a constant presence, someone who filled a void that I had been oblivious to. I left our home that night, my mind in disarray, and wandered the empty streets until the early hours of the morning. Every step was heavy with the weight of shattered dreams. The love I had once known now felt like a cruel illusion, a facade that had crumbled beneath the relentless truth. The hours that followed were a blur of anger, disbelief, and aching sorrow. In the days that followed, life took on an eerie quality. The home that had once been a sanctuary now felt alien and hostile. I moved from room to room, haunted by memories that were now tainted by betrayal. Every familiar corner echoed with the laughter and joy that had once defined our shared life, now replaced by a bitter reminder of everything I had lost. I found myself questioning every decision, every moment of trust. How had I been so blind? Where were the signs that I had overlooked in my desire to believe in our love? My friends reached out, offering condolences and words of support, but nothing could fill the void that Isabella's betrayal had carved into my heart. I isolated myself, retreating into the confines of my apartment and the depths of my own thoughts. During these dark days, I discovered an unexpected outlet in writing. I began to document my feelings in a journal of my own, a desperate attempt to make sense of the chaos that now ruled my mind. The act of writing became a lifeline, a way to transform the raw pain into something tangible, something that might one day lead to healing. I wrote about the beauty of the past, the sweetness of our early days, and the bitter sorrow of the present. Each word was both a release and a reminder of the love that had been lost. Friends and family urged me to seek help, to talk to a therapist, and to lean on those who cared about me. I hesitated at first, reluctant to share the details of my broken heart, but eventually, I agreed to attend counseling sessions. In the quiet, confidential space of a therapist's office, I began to unravel the tangled threads of betrayal and self-doubt. It was there that I learned that healing was not a linear process, it was a journey marked by setbacks and small victories. In one especially challenging therapy session, I was urged to face the question that had troubled me since that ominous night: how did I overlook the signs? Dr. Morgan, my therapist, showed me that I had been stuck in a state of denial. I had decided to believe that our love was flawless, ignoring the early warnings as just small flaws in what appeared to be a perfect relationship. It wasn't about being naive. Instead, my strong emotions and deep need to trust completely had blinded me. Once I accepted this truth, I began to see that trust is both a precious gift and a potential vulnerability. I also tried to view things from Isabella's side. By talking with mutual friends and piecing together bits of conversation after the truth emerged, I learned that her betrayal wasn't caused by just one moment of weakness. Instead, it had been a slow descent, a chain of choices made in moments of loneliness and confusion. Although this did little to ease the hurt from her actions, it helped me realize that human relationships are far more complex than simple right or wrong judgments. There were many layers of emotion, unfulfilled needs, and unsaid truths that had driven her toward infidelity. I remembered the evenings we spent together discussing our hopes and fears, and I began to wonder what had shifted. Had I grown too comfortable? Had our lives become so ordinary that the flame of passion had dwindled to a mere habit? These questions kept haunting me, and I found myself re-examining every memory, trying to pinpoint when everything began to fall apart. This process was painful, yet it was essential. I needed to understand not only the betrayal itself but also the way I had changed in its wake. As months went by, I gradually started noticing small signs of light amid the darkness. Although the pain of betrayal still lingered, it began to loosen its tight hold on my daily life. I started jogging early in the mornings, a time when the city was calm and quiet, and discovered that the steady beat of my footsteps helped slow my racing thoughts. During these solitary runs, I found time to reflect on the lessons I had learned and to appreciate the growing resilience emerging from the wreckage of my heart. I re-established contact with old friends who had always brought me stability and warmth. In particular, a friend named Patrick invited me to join him for weekend hikes in the countryside. Simply being in nature, far from the noisy city, gave me a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. With every climb and descent, I realized I was reclaiming pieces of myself that had been lost in the chaos of betrayal. The physical effort I put into those hikes mirrored the inner work needed to rebuild my life from the ground up. At work, I threw myself into projects that demanded creativity and focus. My love for design, which had always been my escape, turned into a bridge to a newer, better version of myself. I began experimenting with new styles and ideas, channeling the raw feelings from my recent experiences into art that felt both honest and healing. My colleagues noticed a change in me, a quiet determination not to let the past define who I was. Gradually, the sharp sting of betrayal transformed into a steady resolve. I would let myself feel the hurt, but I wouldn't let it control my future. Therapy sessions continued to play a key role in my healing. Dr. Morgan guided me through the stormy process of forgiveness, not just for Isabella's sake, but for my own well-being. Learning to forgive meant letting go of the tight grip of anger and regret. It wasn't about erasing what had happened but about accepting that clinging to bitterness would only block my way forward. In the safe space of those sessions, I delved into the different aspects of trust, love, and the ability to start over. I started to understand that every day was a chance to build a new foundation, not one based on naive perfection, but on a realistic acceptance of life's natural flaws. As the seasons shifted, I changed along with them. The harsh winter eventually melted into the hopeful bloom of spring, bringing with it the promise of fresh beginnings. I realized that the road to healing wasn't straight, it twisted through valleys of sorrow and over peaks of small victories. Each passing day, I began to envision a future where my past no longer held me captive. I started putting more energy into my passions. I signed up for a creative writing workshop, determined to use the power of words to express the many emotions I had experienced. Among fellow writers, I discovered that sharing my story wasn't a sign of weakness but a display of strength. The workshop became a safe space where openness was met with empathy and encouragement. I began writing short stories, tales of love, loss, and redemption, that resonated with others who had walked similar paths. In doing so, I turned my personal tragedy into a source of connection and healing. Eventually, Isabella and I met again in a quiet cafe, our encounter silently acknowledging a shared past that could never be erased. It wasn't a confrontation or an attempt at reconciliation, it was simply an exchange of glances between two people who had once loved deeply. At that moment, I understood that part of healing was accepting that some chapters must end to allow new ones to begin. I wished her well, and deep down, I promised myself to do the same. Gradually, I started to release the endless questioning and self-blame. I came to understand that betrayal did not reflect my worth, but was instead the result of a complex mix of choices and circumstances that can happen in any relationship. As each day passed, the sharp edges of my grief softened, replaced by careful optimism and the growing belief that life could still be beautiful, even after heartbreak. I began dating again, not to fill the void of what I had lost, but to rediscover my identity beyond our old relationship. It was a cautious, gradual process. I met people who showed me that love can take many forms, and that intimacy isn't just about physical closeness but also about emotional connection and mutual respect. Every new encounter was a step toward regaining my sense of self. I learned to set boundaries, to trust slowly, and to appreciate the subtle details of a connection built on genuine compatibility instead of unrealistic ideals. During quiet moments of reflection, I frequently went over the memories of our bright past and the painful discovery that broke it all apart. I learned that trust is a fragile treasure that must be both protected and nurtured. Isabella's betrayal taught me a hard lesson about the complexities of human nature, a reminder that real love demands honesty, openness, and the courage to accept our flaws. I discovered that forgiveness is not a sign of weakness but a way to free oneself from the chains of past pain. The marks of betrayal stayed with me, deeply carved into my soul. They reminded me of a time when I was shattered, yet they also symbolized the strength that helped me rebuild. Every scar proved the inner strength that had grown within me, a quiet promise that I could overcome even the darkest nights. In hindsight, I realized that the journey through betrayal was not solely about losing a relationship, it was also about uncovering the deep ability of the human spirit to heal, learn, and welcome change. I came to understand that even when love weakens, life still offers chances for growth, connection, and new beginnings. Now, as I step into a new chapter of my life, I feel a careful kind of hope. The pain of the past still lingers, but it no longer defines who I am. I have accepted the lessons from the betrayal and allowed them to lead me toward a future where trust is rebuilt slowly, with wisdom and care. I now see that life's surprises make it beautiful, the joy of unexpected friendships, the thrill of rediscovering old passions, and the chance that love, with all its twists and turns, can be found once again. I keep writing, running along quiet trails at sunrise, and connecting with the world around me with a newfound appreciation for its imperfections. Each day feels like a gift, an opportunity to build something meaningful from the broken pieces of my past. I have learned that although heartbreak leaves scars, it also provides the raw materials for a truer, more resilient self. Over time, I realized that forgiveness is not about letting the wrong go unpunished, but about freeing oneself from the weight of anger. I forgave Isabella, not to excuse what she did, but to reclaim my own peace. In forgiving, I discovered that the strongest act of love is often the one we give ourselves, taking care of ourselves, accepting our vulnerability, and daring to believe that happiness can emerge even from deep loss. As I move forward on my path, I carry with me the memory of a love that once was, now softened by the wisdom I gained through pain. I am Daniel Mercer, a man who has experienced deep betrayal and emerged with a quiet strength, a strength that softly reminds me that every ending is just the start of a new story. This story is more than just one of heartbreak and betrayal, it is a tale of transformation. It is a story that recognizes the darkness in our human weaknesses while celebrating the resilience that brings light and the promise of renewal. I share my journey in the hope that those who have been hurt might see that even in the darkest times, a spark of hope is waiting to light the way forward. Life is full of surprises, and love can be messy. Yet it is also the canvas where we create our deepest stories, stories of loss, of pain, and finally, of rebirth. Today, I stand not as a victim of betrayal, but as proof of the human spirit's power to overcome hardship and find beauty even in our broken parts. Let this story remind you that even when trust is broken and hearts are shattered, healing, growth, and a fresh start are possible, a new day when hope emerges from the ashes, and a life rebuilt becomes even richer because of the scars it carries.